A black musician named Robert Turner was laughed off stage by a racist audience, almost giving up on his dreams. But years later, he sells out stadiums across the country. How did Robert turn their ridicule into applause and rise to stardom against all odds? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Robert Turner sat on the edge of his bed, his worn guitar cradled in his arms. The soft twang of country music drifted through the small bedroom as his fingers danced across the strings. His eyes were closed, lost in the melody he was creating. At just 30, Robert had already faced more challenges than most. Growing up as one of the few black kids in a small, mostly white town hadn't been easy. But music had always been his escape, his solace. He opened his eyes and gazed at the poster of Charlie Pride on his wall. The country music legend had been his inspiration, proof that a black man could make it in country music. Robert's heart swelled with hope and determination. "I can do this," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the guitar's gentle notes. The annual music festival was just a week away. Robert had been practicing for months, pouring his heart and soul into every chord, every lyric. This was his chance to show everyone what he could do. He stood up and walked to the mirror, studying his reflection. His dark skin and curly hair stood out in stark contrast to the cowboy hat perched on his head. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. Would the audience accept him? Would they see past his skin color and hear the music in his heart? Robert shook his head, pushing away the negative thoughts. He picked up his guitar pick, determination etched on his face. "It's not about what they see," he told his reflection. "It's about what they hear." He started to play again, his fingers moving faster now, the melody more intense. The music filled the room, a perfect blend of traditional country and Robert's own soulful style. As he sang, his rich voice carried the emotion of every word. This was who he was. This was his dream. And no matter what anyone thought, he was going to chase it with everything he had. The day of the festival finally arrived. Robert's hands trembled as he clutched his guitar case, walking towards the makeshift stage in the town square. The air buzzed with excitement, filled with the chatter of the crowd and the aroma of grilled food. Robert took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. This was his moment, the chance he'd been waiting for. He stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding him. As his eyes adjusted, he saw the sea of faces looking up at him, curious and expectant. With shaky fingers, Robert strapped on his guitar and approached the microphone. "Howdy, folks," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "I'm Robert Turner, and I'm here to play some country for y'all." He started strumming, the familiar chords of his favorite song filling the air. His rich, soulful voice joined in, singing about heartbreak and hope. For a moment, the crowd seemed captivated. Some people even started tapping their feet to the rhythm. But then, Robert noticed a shift. Whispers started spreading through the audience. He saw confused looks, raised eyebrows, and frowns replacing the initial smiles. His heart sank as he realized what was happening. "Is that a black guy playing country?" he heard someone say loudly. Laughter erupted from different corners of the crowd. Robert's fingers faltered on the strings, but he forced himself to keep playing. He'd faced prejudice before, but never like this, never so publicly. "Go back to rap, boy," someone shouted, followed by more laughter. The jeers grew louder, drowning out his music. People started mocking his accent, his clothes, his very presence on the stage. Each taunt felt like a physical blow, chipping away at Robert's confidence. Tears stung his eyes, but he blinked them back furiously. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him cry. Robert tried to lose himself in the music, to block out the cruel laughter and focus on the song, but it was becoming impossible. The jeers and laughter grew louder, drowning out Robert's music completely. His fingers fumbled over the strings, missing notes and chords he'd played 1,000 times before. The cruel words of the crowd cut deep, each one a painful reminder that he didn't belong. Robert's voice cracked as he tried to continue singing. The lyrics he'd practiced so many times now felt foreign on his tongue. He stumbled over the words, his confidence crumbling with each passing second. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his vision blurred with unshed tears. The stage lights felt suffocating, spotlighting his humiliation for everyone to see. Robert's heart raced, pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. He couldn't take it anymore. With trembling hands, Robert stopped playing mid-song. The abrupt silence was deafening, broken only by the continued mockery from the audience. He mumbled a barely audible thank you into the microphone before hurriedly unplugging his guitar. As he rushed off the stage, Robert could hear the festival organizer apologizing to the crowd, promising real country music would be up next. Those words stung worse than any of the insults hurled at him. Backstage, Robert leaned against a wall, his legs weak and shaky. The guitar he'd loved for so long now felt like a dead weight in his hands. Tears he'd been holding back finally spilled down his cheeks. "What was I thinking?" he whispered to himself, sliding down to sit on the ground. "A black man playing country. I'm such a fool." The dream he'd held onto for so long seemed to crumble around him. All those hours of practice, all the hope he'd nurtured, it all felt pointless now. Robert buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. For the first time, he seriously considered giving up. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe he didn't have a place in country music. The thought of never playing again made his heart ache. But how could he go on after this? Robert's hands trembled as he packed up his guitar, each movement feeling like a final goodbye to his dreams. The case clicked shut with a finality that made his heart ache. He wiped away the last of his tears, determined not to let anyone see how deeply he was hurting. As he turned to leave, a gentle voice called out, "Excuse me, young man." Robert looked up to see an older gentleman approaching. The man's kind eyes and warm smile seemed out of place after the cruelty he'd just faced. "I'm Henry Caldwell," the man introduced himself, extending a hand. "I couldn't help but notice your performance out there." Robert's shoulders slumped, bracing himself for more criticism. "Look, sir, I know I messed up. You don't need to tell me how bad it was." Mr. Caldwell shook his head, his expression serious. "No, son. What I saw out there was raw talent. Those people? They don't know what they're missing." Robert blinked in surprise, unsure if he'd heard correctly. You liked it?" "Liked it? Young man, I've been in the music industry for decades, and I know potential when I hear it. What's your name?" "Robert Turner, sir." Mr. Caldwell nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. "Well, Robert, I'd like to make you an offer. I'm retired now, but I used to be a music producer. How would you feel about some mentoring?" Robert's heart skipped a beat. Was this real? After everything that had just happened, could he dare to hope again? You want to help me?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Caldwell placed a reassuring hand on Robert's shoulder. "Son, what happened out there was a tragedy, but it doesn't have to be the end of your story. I believe in your talent, and I'd like to help you develop it. What do you say?" Robert stared at Mr. Caldwell, his heart torn between hope and doubt. The sting of the crowd's jeers still echoed in his ears, making it hard to believe that anyone could see potential in him. I don't know, sir," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After what just happened out there, I'm not sure I'm cut out for this." Mr. Caldwell's eyes softened with understanding. "I know it hurts, son, but don't let one bad experience define your entire future. You've got something special, and it would be a shame to let it go to waste." Robert glanced down at his guitar case, running his fingers along its worn edges. "How do I know this isn't some kind of joke?" he asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "It's not a joke, Robert," Mr. Caldwell assured him firmly. "I've been in this business a long time, and I know talent when I see it. What those people did out there, that was about their ignorance, not your ability." Robert looked up, searching Mr. Caldwell's face for any sign of deceit. All he saw was sincerity and kindness. "Why don't we meet tomorrow?" Mr. Caldwell suggested gently. "We can talk more about your music and what you want to achieve. No pressure, just a conversation. What do you say?" Robert hesitated, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to run away and never pick up a guitar again. But another part, the part that had always dreamed of making it in country music, couldn't let go just yet. Taking a deep breath, Robert nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice gaining a hint of strength. "I'll meet with you tomorrow." Mr. Caldwell's face broke into a warm smile. "That's the spirit, son. How about we meet at the diner on Main Street? Say around 10 a.m.? "All right," Robert agreed, feeling a small spark of hope ignite in his chest. "I'll be there." As they parted ways, Robert couldn't help but wonder if this could be the second chance he never thought he'd get. Maybe, just maybe, his dream wasn't over yet. The next morning, Robert nervously approached the diner on Main Street. His hands were shaking slightly as he pushed open the door, the little bell above it jingling cheerfully. He spotted Mr. Caldwell sitting in a booth near the window, sipping a cup of coffee. "Good morning, Robert," Mr. Caldwell greeted him warmly. "I'm glad you came." Robert slid into the seat across from him. "Thanks for meeting me, sir," he said quietly. As they ordered their breakfast, Mr. Caldwell began to share his own story. "You know, I wasn't always a big shot producer," he said with a chuckle. "I started out just like you, with nothing but a dream and a whole lot of people telling me I couldn't make it." Robert looked up from his plate, surprised. "Really? But you're so successful." Mr. Caldwell nodded. "Success didn't come easy, son. I faced rejection after rejection. There were times I wanted to give up, just like you did yesterday." As Mr. Caldwell continued his story, Robert found himself leaning in, hanging on every word. He heard about the late nights, the constant practice, the doors slammed in Mr. Caldwell's face. But he also heard about the small victories, the gradual recognition, and finally the big break that changed everything. "The key is perseverance, Robert," Mr. Caldwell said, his eyes shining with passion. "You've got to keep pushing, keep improving, no matter what anyone says." Robert felt something stir inside him, a tiny spark of hope that he thought had been extinguished the day before. "But what about the people who don't want to listen to me because of how I look?" he asked hesitantly. Mr. Caldwell leaned forward, his gaze intense. "There will always be people like that, Robert. But for every person who judges you unfairly, there's another who will appreciate your talent for what it is. Your job is to keep working until your music is so good they can't ignore you." As their conversation continued, Robert found himself nodding along, his enthusiasm growing. Mr. Caldwell's words were like a balm to his wounded spirit, slowly healing the hurt from the previous day. "So, what do you say, Robert?" Mr. Caldwell asked finally. "Are you willing to give this dream of yours another shot? With some hard work and guidance, I believe you can go far." Robert took a deep breath, feeling a new sense of determination. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "I'm ready to try again." Mr. Caldwell smiled broadly. "That's what I like to hear. Let's work together and show the world what you're capable of." As they shook hands across the table, Robert felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't alone in this journey anymore, and for the first time in a long while, he truly believed that his dream might be possible after all. As the days turned into weeks, Robert and Mr. Caldwell settled into a rhythm of mentorship. They met regularly at Mr. Caldwell's home studio, a cozy room filled with instruments and recording equipment. "All right, Robert," Mr. Caldwell said one afternoon. "Let's hear what you've been working on." Robert nodded, his fingers finding their familiar place on the guitar strings. He began to play, his voice joining the melody. It was a song he'd played countless times before, but something felt different this time. Mr. Caldwell listened intently, his eyes closed. When Robert finished, he opened them and smiled. "That was good, son, but I think we can make it even better. Have you ever thought about adding some soul to your music?" Robert looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Your voice has a natural richness to it," Mr. Caldwell explained. "Let's try incorporating that into your music. Don't be afraid to let your own style shine through." Over the next few hours, they worked on blending Robert's soulful vocals with the twang of country guitar. It was challenging at first, but as Robert grew more comfortable, something magical began to happen. "That's it!" Mr. Caldwell exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. "That's your sound, Robert. It's unique. It's you." Robert couldn't help but grin. For the first time, he felt like he was truly expressing himself through his music. Encouraged by this breakthrough, Robert threw himself into writing new songs. He spent hours each day with his guitar, scribbling lyrics in a worn notebook. He wrote about his experiences growing up in a small town, about the pain of rejection, and about the hope that Mr. Caldwell had rekindled in him. One day, as Robert played a new song for Mr. Caldwell, he noticed tears in the older man's eyes. "Is it that bad?" Robert asked, worried. Mr. Caldwell shook his head, wiping his eyes. "No, son. It's beautiful. You're telling your story, and it's powerful. This is what music is all about." Robert felt a warmth spread through his chest. He'd always loved music, but now he was beginning to understand its true power. Through his songs, he could share his experiences, his pain, and his dreams. And maybe, just maybe, he could touch others who felt the same way. One afternoon, Robert stood outside the Moonshine Bar, his guitar case clutched tightly in his hand. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves before pushing open the door. The smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hit him as he walked in, eyes scanning for the manager. "Can I help you?" a gruff voice called out. Robert turned to see a middle-aged man wiping down the bar. "Yes, sir. I'm here to talk about playing a gig this weekend." The manager looked Robert up and down, his expression changing. "We don't really do that kind of music here." Robert's heart sank, but he pressed on. "I play country, sir. I thought that's what you usually have here." The manager's face hardened. "Look, kid, I'll be straight with you. Our customers, they're not going to want to see someone like you up on that stage. It's just not good for business." The words hit Robert like a punch to the gut. He stood there, stunned, as the manager turned away, clearly considering the conversation over. With his cheeks burning, Robert left the bar, his dreams feeling further away than ever. He walked aimlessly, eventually finding himself at Mr. Caldwell's house. Mr. Caldwell opened the door, his smile fading as he saw Robert's dejected expression. "What happened, son?" Robert explained the encounter, his voice breaking. "Maybe I'm just fooling myself, Mr. Caldwell. Maybe there's no place for me in country music." Mr. Caldwell's eyes flashed with determination. "Now you listen here, Robert. That man's ignorance doesn't define your talent or your worth. This industry isn't easy and you're going to face more rejection. But you can't let it stop you." Robert looked up, seeing the fire in his mentor's eyes. "But what if no one ever gives me a chance?" "Then we make our own chances," Mr. Caldwell said firmly. "We'll find a way to get your music heard, even if we have to set up on the street corner. Your voice deserves to be heard, Robert." Something stirred in Robert's chest, a mixture of gratitude and renewed determination. He nodded, straightening his shoulders. "You're right. I can't give up now. Not when I've come this far." Mr. Caldwell smiled, patting Robert on the back. "That's the spirit, son. Now, let's get to work on your next song. We'll show them all what you're made of." In the days following Robert's rejection at the Moonshine Bar, Mr. Caldwell worked tirelessly to find a new opportunity for his protege. He made countless phone calls, tapping into his old industry connections. Finally, his efforts paid off. "Robert, I've got great news," Mr. Caldwell announced one evening, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I've arranged for you to perform at the Melody Lounge in Rivertown. It's a small venue, but they're known for showcasing diverse talent." Robert's heart leaped with hope. "Really, that's amazing, Mr. Caldwell." The night of the performance arrived, and Robert found himself standing backstage at the Melody Lounge. His palms were sweaty as he gripped his guitar, memories of his last public performance threatening to overwhelm him. Mr. Caldwell placed a reassuring hand on Robert's shoulder. "Remember, son, you've got this. Just sing from your heart." Taking a deep breath, Robert stepped onto the small stage. The intimate venue was filled with a diverse crowd, their faces curious and expectant. Robert closed his eyes, took another breath, and began to play. As the first notes of his guitar filled the air, Robert felt the familiar calm wash over him. He opened his eyes and began to sing, his voice rich with emotion. The audience listened intently, some nodding along to the rhythm. When the last note faded away, there was a moment of silence. Then, to Robert's amazement, the room erupted in applause. He looked out at the smiling faces, feeling a wave of relief and joy wash over him. After the show, people came up to Robert, praising his performance and asking about his music. One woman, her eyes shining, said, "Your voice is so authentic. It's refreshing to hear real country music again." As they drove home that night, Robert couldn't stop smiling. Mr. Caldwell glanced over at him, a proud look on his face. "You did it, Robert. You showed them what you're capable of." Robert nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, for believing in me, for not letting me give up. I know the road ahead won't be easy, but I'm ready to face it." With a newfound sense of purpose, Robert returned to his hometown, ready to face the challenges that awaited him. The memory of his successful performance at the Melody Lounge fueled his determination. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was prepared to work harder than ever before. Robert spent hours each day practicing, refining his skills, and writing new songs. Mr. Caldwell continued to mentor him, offering guidance and support. Together, they searched for opportunities, no matter how small. Their first breakthrough came when a local coffee shop agreed to let Robert play during their Friday night open mic. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Robert poured his heart into every performance, his soulful voice and heartfelt lyrics slowly winning over the skeptical patrons. Word began to spread about the talented young musician. Soon, Robert was invited to play at a friend's birthday party, then at a small wedding reception. Each gig, no matter how small, was a chance to showcase his talent and build his reputation. Despite the progress, Robert still faced rejection and prejudice. Some venues turned him away without even listening to his music. But instead of letting it discourage him, Robert used these experiences to fuel his passion, channeling his emotions into his songwriting. As weeks turned into months, Robert's perseverance began to pay off. He started to notice familiar faces in the crowds, people who came specifically to hear him play. A small but loyal fan base was forming, drawn to his unique blend of traditional country and soulful melodies. One evening, after a particularly well-received performance at a local bar, a young woman approached Robert. "Your music speaks to me," she said, her eyes bright with admiration. "It's like you're telling my story through your songs." Robert smiled, touched by her words. It was moments like these that reminded him why he loved music so much. He was connecting with people, breaking down barriers one song at a time. As Robert's local popularity grew, he and Mr. Caldwell decided it was time to take the next step. They began reaching out to record labels and producers in Nashville, hoping to secure a recording contract or at least get Robert's foot in the door of the country music industry. The response was disheartening. One after another, the rejections piled up. Some were polite but firm, while others didn't even bother to reply. A few expressed interest in Robert's demo tape but backpedaled when they learned he was black. "I'm sorry, son," one producer said over the phone, his voice tinged with regret. "Your music is good, real good, but the market just ain't ready for a black country star." Robert hung up the phone, his heart heavy. He slumped onto his bed, guitar forgotten beside him. The words echoed in his mind, each repetition a painful reminder of the uphill battle he faced. Mr. Caldwell found him like that an hour later. "Rough day?" he asked gently. Robert nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Mr. Caldwell sat down next to him, his weathered hand resting on Robert's shoulder. "I know it's hard, son, but remember why you started this journey. It wasn't for them. It was for the music, for the people who need to hear your story." Robert took a deep breath, letting his mentor's words sink in. He picked up his guitar, fingers automatically finding the strings. As he strummed a soft melody, he felt the tension begin to ease from his shoulders. "You're right," Robert said, his voice growing stronger. "I didn't come this far to give up now." The rejections continued to come, each one a blow to Robert's spirit. But with every no, his determination only grew stronger. He poured his frustration and pain into his music, writing songs that spoke of perseverance in the face of adversity. With Mr. Caldwell's guidance, Robert decided to take matters into his own hands. They agreed that waiting for the industry to accept him wasn't working. It was time to make his own path. "We'll do it ourselves," Mr. Caldwell declared, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I've got some old recording equipment in my garage. It's not fancy, but it'll do the job." Over the next few weeks, they transformed Mr. Caldwell's cluttered garage into a makeshift studio. They hung blankets on the walls to muffle the sound and set up microphones and mixing equipment. It wasn't perfect, but to Robert, it felt like a dream come true. As Robert began recording his first album, he realized just how challenging the process could be. Hours stretched into days as he worked tirelessly to get each track just right. His fingers ached from playing guitar, and his voice grew hoarse from countless takes. "That's the one," Mr. Caldwell would say, smiling through the glass of the makeshift control room. "You've got it, son." Robert poured his heart and soul into every song. Each lyric told a story of struggle, hope, and the unbreakable spirit of a dreamer. He sang of small-town life, of love and loss, and of the power of music to heal and unite. One evening, as they finished recording a particularly emotional ballad, Robert noticed tears in Mr. Caldwell's eyes. "You okay, Mr. Caldwell?" he asked, concerned. The older man nodded, wiping his eyes. "More than okay, Robert. You're creating something special here, something that's going to touch people's hearts." Those words fueled Robert's determination even more. He threw himself into the recording process with renewed vigor, determined to make every song on the album a masterpiece. After weeks of tireless work, Robert's album was finally complete. He and Mr. Caldwell sat in the garage studio, listening to the finished product with a mix of exhaustion and pride. "We did it," Robert breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. Mr. Caldwell nodded, a proud smile on his face. "Now comes the hard part, son, getting it out there." They started small, uploading the album to online music platforms and social media. Robert created a simple website to showcase his music and story. Mr. Caldwell reached out to his old contacts, sending copies of the album to local radio stations and music reviewers. At first, the response was slow. Robert checked his online stats obsessively, his heart sinking each time he saw the low number of plays. But Mr. Caldwell kept his spirits up. "Good things take time," he reminded Robert. "Keep faith in your music." Slowly but surely, things began to change. A local record store agreed to stock a few copies of Robert's album. Then, a small radio station in the next town over played one of his songs during their late-night country music hour. Word started to spread. Music lovers who stumbled upon Robert's album online began sharing it with friends. Comments appeared on his website, praising his unique sound and heartfelt lyrics. One day, Robert received an email from a fan in Texas. "Your music speaks to my soul," it read. "You're bringing something fresh to country music. Don't stop." As the weeks passed, Robert's online plays began to climb. More local venues reached out, offering him gigs. People started recognizing him on the street, stopping to tell him how much they loved his music. At one of his performances, Robert noticed a group of young black men in the audience, nodding along to his music. After the show, one of them approached him. "Man, you're an inspiration," he said, shaking Robert's hand. "Never thought I'd see someone who looks like me up there singing country. You're changing things." Those words hit Robert hard. He realized that his music wasn't just fulfilling his own dreams, it was opening doors for others too. As Robert's local popularity grew, word of his talent began to spread beyond the confines of his small town. One day, he received an unexpected call from a local company planning their annual employee appreciation event. They were looking for entertainment, and Robert's name had come up. "It's not a big gig," Mr. Caldwell cautioned when Robert shared the news. "But it's a foot in the door." Robert nodded, his eyes shining with excitement. Every chance is a chance, right? The event was held in a rented hall at the outskirts of town. As Robert set up his equipment, he couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and anticipation. The audience was a sea of unfamiliar faces, most engrossed in conversation or focused on their plates of catered food. Taking a deep breath, Robert began to play. His fingers danced across the guitar strings, and his voice, rich and soulful, filled the room. At first, only a few heads turned his way. But as he continued, more and more people stopped to listen. By the time he finished his first song, the room had fallen silent. All eyes were on Robert. He launched into his next number, a heartfelt ballad about chasing dreams against all odds. As he sang, he noticed a few people in the crowd wiping away tears. When his set ended, the applause was thunderous. People approached him, praising his performance and asking where they could find his music. Robert's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. What Robert didn't know was that among the crowd were a few music industry professionals. They had been invited as guests and hadn't expected to discover new talent at a company event. But Robert's raw emotion and unique sound had caught their attention. As Robert packed up his guitar, a well-dressed woman approached him. "That was quite a performance," she said, handing him her business card. "I'd love to talk more about your music." Robert's hands trembled as he read the card. She was a producer from a respected indie label. He looked up, a mixture of shock and hope on his face. "I'd like that," he managed to say. Robert's spirits soared in the days following the company event. The producer's interest seemed like a sign that his hard work was finally paying off. He spent hours rehearsing, polishing his songs, and dreaming of the future. But just as hope began to bloom, a crushing blow arrived. The organizers of a major music festival in the region called to cancel Robert's scheduled performance. Their words stung like salt in a fresh wound. "We're concerned about your ability to draw a crowd," the organizer explained, his voice cold and impersonal. "We need acts that can guarantee ticket sales." Robert's hand shook as he ended the call. The room seemed to spin around him, and he felt like he couldn't breathe. This festival was supposed to be his big break, a chance to showcase his talent to thousands of music lovers. Now it was slipping through his fingers like sand. Tears welled up in Robert's eyes as he dialed Mr. Caldwell's number. His mentor listened patiently as Robert poured out his frustration and disappointment. "I thought things were finally looking up," Robert said, his voice cracking. "But it feels like I'm right back where I started." Mr. Caldwell's voice was calm and reassuring. "Robert, listen to me. Setbacks are a part of the journey. Every successful musician has faced rejection and disappointment. It's how you respond to these challenges that defines you." Robert wiped his eyes, clinging to Mr. Caldwell's words like a lifeline. "But what if they're right? What if I can't draw a crowd?" "That's nonsense, and you know it," Mr. Caldwell replied firmly. "I've seen how people respond to your music. Those festival organizers don't know what they're missing." As Mr. Caldwell continued to speak, Robert felt his resolve slowly strengthening. His mentor's unwavering faith in him was like a beacon in the darkness of his disappointment. Robert's phone rang late one evening, just as he was about to call it a night. He answered, not recognizing the number, and his heart nearly stopped when he heard the voice on the other end. "Is this Robert Turner?" a man asked urgently. "This is Mark Stevens, manager for the Country Flames. We've got an emergency situation." Robert's mind raced. The Country Flames were one of the hottest country bands in the region. "Yes, this is Robert. What's going on?" Mark explained rapidly. "Our opening act just canceled due to a family emergency. We've heard good things about you, and we're in a bind. Can you fill in tomorrow night?" Robert's hand trembled as he gripped the phone tighter. This was it, the break he'd been waiting for, a chance to perform in front of thousands of country music fans. "Yes, absolutely," Robert exclaimed, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'd be honored." After hanging up, Robert sat on his bed, his heart pounding. He knew this was a pivotal moment in his career. He had to make it count. Robert spent the next few hours in a frenzy of preparation. He carefully selected his best songs, polished his guitar, and laid out his performance outfit. Sleep was out of the question. Adrenaline coursed through his veins. As dawn broke, Robert called Mr. Caldwell to share the news. His mentor's pride and excitement were palpable through the phone. "This is your moment, Robert," Mr. Caldwell said warmly. "You've worked so hard for this. Just be yourself up there and let your music speak for itself." Robert arrived at the venue early, his stomach in knots. The enormity of the opportunity before him was overwhelming. As he waited backstage, he could hear the excited chatter of the growing crowd. Mark Stevens approached him, clipboard in hand. "You're on in 30 minutes, Robert. Are you ready?" Robert took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm ready." As he stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinded him. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Robert's hands shook as he adjusted his guitar strap. As Robert stepped up to the microphone, he took a deep breath to steady his nerves. The sea of faces before him seemed to stretch endlessly. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering Mr. Caldwell's words, "Let your music speak for itself." With trembling fingers, Robert strummed the first chord of his opening song. The familiar notes washed over him, and suddenly the nerves melted away. He opened his eyes and began to sing, his rich voice carrying across the venue. The crowd, initially curious about this unknown opener, fell silent as Robert's soulful melody filled the air. His unique blend of traditional country twang and heartfelt emotion caught their attention. As he moved into the chorus, Robert's confidence grew and his voice soared. Song after song, Robert poured his heart into his performance. He shared stories of struggle, hope, and perseverance through his music. The audience, initially skeptical, found themselves drawn in by the raw authenticity of his lyrics and the power of his voice. As Robert launched into his final song, a ballad about chasing dreams against all odds, he noticed something incredible. People in the crowd were swaying, some with their eyes closed, others with their hands raised. He could see lips moving as some audience members sang along, having quickly picked up the catchy chorus. When the last note faded away, there was a moment of silence. Robert's heart pounded in his chest, unsure of how the audience would react. Then, like a wave, applause erupted throughout the venue. To Robert's amazement, people began to stand, their cheers growing louder. A standing ovation for him. Robert Turner, the boy who had once been laughed off stage in his small town, was now receiving a standing ovation from thousands of country music fans. Overwhelmed with emotion, Robert bowed deeply, tears glistening in his eyes. As he looked out at the cheering crowd, he saw faces filled with genuine appreciation and admiration. For the first time in his life, Robert felt truly seen and accepted as a country musician. As Robert left the stage, his heart still racing from the exhilarating performance, he was met with a flurry of activity backstage. People he had never seen before were approaching him, their faces beaming with excitement. "That was incredible," a tall woman in a sleek suit exclaimed, extending her hand. "I'm Mina from Harmony Records. We need to talk about your future." Before Robert could respond, another voice chimed in. "Don't listen to her, kid. I'm Jack from Stardust Management. We can make you a star." Robert's head was spinning as more and more people crowded around him, each trying to outdo the others with their praise and offers. Business cards were thrust into his hands, and promises of fame and fortune filled the air. Mr. Caldwell, who had been watching from the sidelines, gently pushed through the crowd to stand beside Robert. He placed a steadying hand on the young musician's shoulder. "Take a breath, son," Mr. Caldwell said softly. "You've earned this moment." Robert nodded, grateful for his mentor's calming presence. He looked down at the handful of business cards he now held, each one representing a potential path to his dreams. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. As the excitement continued to swirl around him, Robert felt a mix of emotions: joy at the recognition of his talent, gratitude for the opportunity he had been given, and a hint of nervousness about what might come next. But underneath it all was a solid foundation of determination. "Thank you all so much," Robert said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I'm truly honored by your interest. If you don't mind, I'd like to take some time to consider all of these wonderful offers." The producers and agents nodded in understanding, still eager to secure a commitment from the rising star. Robert knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in his journey. He had proven to himself and to the world that his talent transcended color barriers, but there was still a long road ahead. With Mr. Caldwell by his side, Robert began the process of sifting through the numerous offers he had received. They set up meetings with various record labels and producers, carefully considering each proposal. "Remember, Robert," Mr. Caldwell advised, "it's not just about the money. You need to find a partner who understands and respects your vision." Robert nodded, taking his mentor's words to heart. In each meeting, he made it clear that his unique blend of country and soul was non-negotiable. Some executives balked at this, trying to push him towards a more mainstream sound. "We could make you the next big pop country crossover star," one producer insisted, his eyes gleaming with dollar signs. Robert politely declined. "I appreciate the offer, but that's not who I am, or the music I want to make." As they left that meeting, Mr. Caldwell patted Robert on the back. "I'm proud of you, son. It takes guts to stand your ground like that." Days turned into weeks as they continued their search for the right partner. Robert felt the pressure mounting, but he refused to rush his decision. He knew that this choice would shape the trajectory of his career. Finally, they met with a smaller independent label that specialized in Americana and roots music. The label's owner, a woman named Sarah, listened intently as Robert played a few of his songs. "Your sound is fresh," Sarah said, her eyes shining with excitement. "It's authentic and powerful. We'd be honored to work with you, Robert, and we promise to let you stay true to your artistic vision." Robert exchanged a glance with Mr. Caldwell, who gave him an approving nod. For the first time since the whirlwind of offers began, Robert felt a sense of peace. This felt right. "I think we have a deal," Robert said, shaking Sarah's hand. As they left the office, Mr. Caldwell smiled at his protege. "You've come a long way, Robert. But remember, this is just the beginning. The real work starts now." Robert nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and determination. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it head-on, with his integrity intact and his music as his guiding light. With his record deal secured, Robert and his new label team got to work on his debut single. They chose a song that Robert had written during his darkest days, a heartfelt ballad that chronicled his journey from small-town dreamer to rising star. The day of the single's release arrived, and Robert felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He sat in the studio with Mr. Caldwell, watching as the song hit the airwaves for the first time. "This is it, son," Mr. Caldwell said, squeezing Robert's shoulder. "Your voice is finally going to be heard." Within hours, the song began to gain traction. Radio stations across the country picked it up, drawn to its raw emotion and authenticity. Listeners called in, sharing how Robert's story resonated with their own struggles and dreams. As days turned into weeks, Robert watched in awe as his single climbed the country music charts. It started at number 50, then 40, then 30, defying expectations with each passing day. "I can't believe this is happening," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion as he saw his name in the top 20. Mr. Caldwell smiled proudly. "Believe it, Robert. Your talent and perseverance are finally paying off." The song's success brought Robert into the spotlight. He was invited to perform on popular country music shows and podcasts. Each appearance allowed him to share his story and his music with a wider audience. Fans began to reach out on social media, sharing how his music had touched their lives. Robert read each message with gratitude, amazed at the connection he was forming with people across the country. As his single broke into the top 10, Robert's name became a topic of discussion in the country music world. Critics praised his unique sound and powerful lyrics, while fans eagerly awaited his next release. Robert's career soared to new heights as he embarked on his first nationwide stadium tour. The excitement was palpable as he stepped onto the stage of the first venue, a massive arena that could hold over 50,000 people. The roar of the crowd was deafening, and Robert felt his heart swell with emotion. As he strummed the opening chords of his hit single, the audience erupted in cheers. Robert's voice, rich and soulful, filled the stadium, touching the hearts of everyone present. He poured his heart into every note, every lyric, sharing his journey with thousands of fans who hung on his every word. Night after night, city after city, Robert's shows were sold out. Fans traveled from far and wide to hear him perform, many sharing stories of how his music had impacted their lives. The energy at each concert was electric, with audiences singing along to every song, their voices joining Robert's in a powerful chorus. Between shows, Robert found himself overwhelmed by the whirlwind of his new life. He did countless interviews, signed autographs for hours, and met with fans who had won backstage passes. Despite the hectic schedule, he never forgot where he came from. Before each performance, he would take a moment to call Mr. Caldwell, sharing the excitement and gratitude he felt. "I wish you could see this, Mr. Caldwell," Robert said one evening, his voice filled with awe. "The stadiums, the fans, it's more than I ever dreamed of." Mr. Caldwell's proud chuckle came through the phone. "I can hear it in your voice, son. You're living your dream, and you deserve every bit of it." As the tour progressed, Robert's fame continued to grow. His music videos racked up millions of views online, and his albums flew off the shelves. He was no longer just a rising star in country music. He had become a bona fide sensation, breaking barriers and changing the face of the genre. As Robert's tour continued, he found himself with a powerful platform to spread a message of hope and unity. At each concert, he took a moment to share his journey with the audience, speaking from the heart about the challenges he had faced and overcome. "Music has no color," Robert would say, his voice filled with emotion. "It's about what's in your heart and the love you put into every note." His words resonated with fans of all backgrounds. People from different walks of life found common ground in Robert's music and message. He became more than just a country music star. He was a symbol of resilience and change. During interviews, Robert spoke openly about his experiences with discrimination and the importance of perseverance. He shared stories of the times he was turned away from venues and rejected by labels, using these moments to inspire others facing similar challenges. "Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong," he'd say, his eyes shining with determination. "If you've got a dream, hold on to it tight and work hard. Your time will come." Robert's influence extended beyond his music. He started partnering with organizations that promoted diversity in the arts, using his success to open doors for other aspiring musicians from underrepresented backgrounds. He established a scholarship fund for young, diverse artists looking to break into country music, hoping to pave the way for future generations. At each stop on his tour, Robert made time to visit local schools and community centers. He would perform for the children, sharing his story and encouraging them to embrace their uniqueness. His visits left a lasting impact, inspiring young people to pursue their passions regardless of the obstacles they might face. As his fame grew, so did the impact of his message. Robert's music became a bridge, bringing together people from different cultures and backgrounds. Fans often shared how his songs had helped them see past their differences and find common ground with others. As Robert's tour came to an end, he returned home to rest and reflect on his incredible journey. One morning, as he sat on his porch strumming his guitar, a letter arrived that made his heart skip a beat. It was an invitation from the mayor of his hometown, asking him to headline the annual music festival. Robert's hands trembled as he read the letter. Memories of that painful day years ago flooded back, the jeers, the laughter, the crushing disappointment. He could almost hear the cruel words echoing in his mind. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered to himself, his voice thick with emotion. Robert spent the next few days wrestling with the decision. He paced his living room, picked up his guitar only to set it down again, and stared out the window for hours. The invitation stirred up a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he had dreamed of returning to that stage as a successful artist, proving all the doubters wrong. On the other, the fear of facing those same people who had rejected him was overwhelming. As he pondered his decision, Robert thought about how far he had come. He remembered the countless nights of practice, the rejections that had only made him stronger, and the unwavering support of Mr. Caldwell. He thought about all the fans who had found hope in his music and his story. "Maybe this is my chance to come full circle," Robert mused, running his fingers along the smooth wood of his guitar, "to show them that their words couldn't break me." He picked up the phone to call Mr. Caldwell, seeking advice from the man who had believed in him from the start. As they talked, Robert felt a sense of clarity washing over him. This wasn't just about proving people wrong. It was about showing others that dreams can come true no matter where you come from. With a deep breath, Robert picked up the phone and dialed the mayor's office. His voice trembled slightly as he accepted the invitation to headline the town's annual music festival. As he hung up, a mix of excitement and anxiety washed over him. The next day, Robert met with Mr. Caldwell at their favorite local cafe. The older man's eyes twinkled with pride as Robert shared his decision. "I'm proud of you, son," Mr. Caldwell said, reaching across the table to pat Robert's hand. "It takes real courage to face your past like this." Robert nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm scared, Mr. Caldwell. What if they still don't accept me?" Mr. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Robert, you're not the same young man who stepped on that stage years ago. You've grown, not just as a musician, but as a person. This is your chance to show them that." As the days passed, Robert threw himself into preparing for the performance. He spent hours crafting the perfect set list, choosing songs that told his story of struggle and triumph. Each note he played on his guitar was infused with the emotions of his journey. The night before the festival, Robert couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, memories of that first painful performance mingling with visions of his recent successes. As dawn broke, he got up and picked up his guitar, letting the familiar weight of it in his hands calm his nerves. On the day of the festival, Robert arrived early at the venue. As he walked towards the stage for sound check, he paused, taking in the sight of the empty field that would soon be filled with people. His heart raced, but there was a new determination in his steps. Backstage, Robert closed his eyes and took deep breaths, centering himself. He thought about all the people who had supported him along the way. Mr. Caldwell, his fans, and even those who had doubted him. They had all played a part in shaping him into the artist he was today. As the announcer called his name, Robert squared his shoulders and walked out onto the stage. The crowd's reaction was a mix of cheers and surprised murmurs. Robert gripped his guitar tightly, his eyes scanning the audience. He saw familiar faces, some welcoming, some skeptical, and some simply curious. As the first chords of Robert's guitar rang out across the field, a hush fell over the crowd. The familiar notes of his hit single filled the air, and Robert's rich, soulful voice followed. The audience listened, captivated by the raw emotion in his performance. Robert's fingers danced across the strings, each note a testament to his journey. As he sang, he poured his heart into every word, telling the story of a young man who refused to give up on his dreams. The crowd swayed to the rhythm, many singing along to the lyrics they knew by heart. Looking out at the sea of faces, Robert spotted Mr. Caldwell in the front row, beaming with pride. Their eyes met, and Robert felt a surge of gratitude for the man who had believed in him when no one else did. As the song came to an end, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Robert felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the stark contrast to his first performance on this very stage. He took a moment to compose himself before speaking into the microphone. "Thank you all," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It means more than you know to be back here, in my hometown, sharing my music with you." The audience cheered even louder, their enthusiasm washing over Robert like a warm embrace. He saw people in the crowd wiping away tears, moved by his words and his music. As Robert launched into his next song, he felt a sense of triumph coursing through his veins. He had done it. He had turned his biggest setback into his greatest victory. The very stage that had once been the site of his humiliation was now the platform for his triumphant return. With each song, Robert's confidence grew. He interacted with the audience, sharing snippets of his journey between songs. The crowd hung on his every word, laughing at his jokes and nodding in understanding at his struggles. As Robert strummed the opening chords of the song that had once been met with jeers and laughter, a wave of emotion washed over him. This time, the audience leaned in, eager to hear every note. His fingers moved deftly across the strings, and his voice, rich with experience and emotion, filled the air. The lyrics, once mocked, now resonated with the crowd. They swayed to the rhythm, some closing their eyes, others mouthing the words along with him. As Robert poured his heart into the performance, he felt a sense of healing. Each note seemed to wash away the pain of that long-ago day, replacing it with triumph and joy. The crowd's energy buoyed him, their acceptance and admiration palpable. When he hit the final chorus, Robert's voice soared. The audience, moved by the raw emotion in his performance, began to rise to their feet. By the time the last note faded away, the entire crowd was standing, erupting into thunderous applause. Robert stood there for a moment, guitar in hand, taking in the sight before him. Tears glistened in his eyes as he looked out at the sea of smiling faces. This was more than just applause. It was vindication. After the cheers subsided, Robert stepped up to the microphone. His voice was thick with emotion as he spoke. "Thank you all," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "This song, it means so much to me. It reminds me of where I started and how far we've all come together." The crowd listened intently as Robert continued. "Music has the power to bring us together, to help us understand each other. I'm grateful for each and every one of you who've been part of this journey." With a deep breath, Robert announced, "This next song will be my last for tonight. It's a new one, and I hope it touches your hearts the way you've touched mine." As the applause faded, Robert stood at the microphone, his guitar slung over his shoulder. The crowd hushed, eager to hear what he had to say. "Folks," he began, his voice soft but clear, "I can't tell you how much this means to me. Standing here, in this very spot where my dreams once seemed to shatter, I'm filled with so many emotions." Robert paused, taking a deep breath. "You know, there was a time when I thought I didn't belong in country music, that my skin color meant I couldn't be part of this beautiful tradition." He looked out at the sea of faces, seeing nods of understanding and empathy. "But I learned something important along the way. Our differences, they don't divide us. They make our music richer, more colorful." Robert's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I want to tell all of you, especially the young folks out there with big dreams, don't ever let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Your voice matters. Your story matters." Tears glistened in his eyes as he spoke. "It wasn't an easy road. There were times I wanted to give up, but I held on to my dream, and I kept pushing forward. And you know what? That's the key. Perseverance. Believing in yourself even when it seems like no one else does." The crowd hung on his every word, many wiping away tears of their own. Robert's sincerity and emotion touched their hearts deeply. "We all have the power to make a difference," Robert said, his voice filled with conviction. "To change minds, to open hearts. It starts with embracing who we are and respecting others for who they are." He looked around the audience, making eye contact with as many people as he could. "I'm standing here today because of the kindness and support of people who looked beyond the color of my skin and saw my passion for music. People like Mr. Caldwell, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Robert's words resonated with the crowd, stirring emotions and inspiring reflection. His journey from rejection to acceptance, from doubt to triumph, spoke to the universal human experience of struggle and perseverance. The same festival that once laughed him off now cheers for him, with the entire town on its feet in admiration. Robert's heartfelt speech at the festival left a lasting impact on the audience. As he stepped off the stage, he was met with a wave of people wanting to shake his hand, share their own stories, and express their gratitude. The energy in the air was electric, filled with a sense of unity and hope that Robert had never experienced before in his hometown. In the days that followed, Robert found himself reflecting deeply on the power of his music and his words. He realized that his journey wasn't just about achieving personal success. It was about opening doors and changing perceptions for others who might face similar challenges. Inspired by this revelation, Robert began to approach his music with a renewed sense of purpose. He started writing songs that not only told his own story, but also addressed broader themes of acceptance, equality, and the universal human experience. His lyrics became more intentional, weaving messages of hope and unity into melodies that touched people's hearts. As Robert's popularity continued to grow, he used his interviews and social media platforms to speak out against discrimination and promote inclusivity in the music industry. He shared stories of other aspiring artists from diverse backgrounds, using his influence to shine a light on talent that might otherwise go unnoticed. Robert also started organizing benefit concerts in small towns across the country, similar to the one where he had faced rejection early in his career. These concerts became more than just musical performances. They were opportunities for communities to come together, to celebrate diversity, and to have important conversations about acceptance and understanding. The impact of Robert's efforts began to ripple outward. Young musicians from various backgrounds reached out to him, sharing how his story had inspired them to pursue their dreams despite obstacles. Music industry executives, impressed by Robert's dedication and the positive change he was creating, started to take notice and reconsider their approach to diversity in country music. As Robert's career continued to flourish, his influence in the country music industry grew exponentially. His unique blend of soulful vocals and traditional country sound resonated with fans across the nation, breaking down long-standing barriers in the genre. With each new album and sold-out concert, Robert was not just making music, he was making history. The industry took notice of Robert's success, and slowly but surely, doors began to open for other Black musicians in country music. Record labels that had once been hesitant to sign diverse artists were now actively seeking them out, inspired by Robert's widespread appeal and commercial success. At music festivals and award shows, Robert made it a point to use his platform to showcase emerging Black country artists. He invited them to perform duets with him on stage, introducing them to his massive fan base and industry insiders alike. These collaborations not only gave these artists exposure, but also sent a powerful message about the changing face of country music. Robert's success story became a beacon of hope for aspiring musicians of color who had previously felt shut out of the genre. Fan letters poured in from young Black artists who saw themselves represented in country music for the first time. Robert made it a priority to respond to as many of these messages as he could, offering words of encouragement and advice. As Robert's influence grew, he was invited to speak at music industry conferences and panel discussions. He used these opportunities to address the lack of diversity in country music head-on, challenging executives and producers to rethink their approach to talent scouting and artist development. His words carried weight, backed by the undeniable success of his own career. The impact of Robert's advocacy began to show in tangible ways. Music charts that had once been dominated by white artists now featured a more diverse array of voices. Radio stations that had been reluctant to play music by Black country artists were now showcasing their songs alongside established stars. As Robert's career reached new heights, he often found himself reflecting on the long and challenging journey that had brought him to this point. His thoughts frequently turned to the people who had supported him along the way, especially Mr. Henry Caldwell, the retired music producer who had believed in him when no one else would. One evening, as Robert prepared for a sold-out stadium show, he decided it was time to pay tribute to the man who had changed his life. He carefully planned a special segment of the concert dedicated to Mr. Caldwell, wanting to show his gratitude in the most meaningful way he knew how, through music. The night of the concert arrived, and the stadium buzzed with excitement. As Robert took the stage, the crowd erupted in cheers. He played through his set list, his soulful voice and skilled guitar work captivating the audience as always. Then, as the last notes of his latest hit faded away, Robert stepped up to the microphone with a tender smile on his face. "Tonight," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I want to share something special with all of you. There's a man in this audience who saw something in me when I was ready to give up on my dreams. Mr. Henry Caldwell, this one's for you." The spotlight swept across the crowd, finally settling on Mr. Caldwell, who sat in the front row, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Robert began to play a new song, one he had written specifically for this moment. The melody was a beautiful blend of traditional country and Robert's unique style, telling the story of a mentor's unwavering faith and a student's journey to success. As Robert sang, his voice carried the weight of years of struggle, hope, and triumph. The lyrics spoke of dark days overcome, of persistence rewarded, and of gratitude that could never be fully expressed. The stadium fell silent, thousands of listeners hanging on every word and note. Mr. Caldwell listened, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, as Robert's tribute unfolded. The song painted a vivid picture of their first meeting, the long hours of practice in Mr. Caldwell's garage, and the countless moments of encouragement that had kept Robert going when the odds seemed insurmountable. As the song reached its crescendo, Robert's voice soared, filling the stadium with a powerful message of thanks. The final note rang out, clear and true, and for a moment, there was complete silence. Then, as if a dam had broken, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause and cheers. If you enjoyed the story of Robert, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.